Good afternoon, everybody listening or watching. Welcome to the first official live debate from the Airship Association under the series Floating Ideas. For those of you who may be in England, we're having a bit of a warm day today, so I'm taking advantage of that by wearing my summer shirt. I am your host today and the moderator of our panel. My name is Gregory Gottlieb. I'm chairman of the Airship Association. And I'd like to welcome you all, whether you're watching live on Facebook, or there's a small possibility you might be watching live on LinkedIn, which we're having some technical issues with. But whether it's live or you're watching it after the event, welcome. The theme for today's debate is a very important one. We thought, as we set these debates up, that we would grab the situation by the horns, so to speak, and go in with all guns blazing. And so our topic today is airships, facts, and fallacies. And the debate we're going to have today will be participated in by our panel, who I will introduce in a moment. But the aim is to debunk all of the myths about airships that so many of you will have heard. If you're involved, and if you're not involved, you will maybe have heard as well, and face many of the unhelpful assumptions about airships that people often make. Now, joining me today in this live panel, we have a stellar cast, led by Dr. Giles Camplin, our PhD representative, who is a lighter-than-air historian, a council member of the Airship Association, but has been involved with airships dating right back to the film Chitty Chitty Bang Bang in, what was it, the 1960s, I think. So he's actually very young at heart, but despite having started with airships so long ago. But welcome, Giles. Thank you very much for joining the panel today. Second, we have Johannes Eising, also a council member of the Airship Association. Hannes is an aeronautical engineer who is the founder and chief executive officer of a relatively new airship company called Troponaut UG. But Johannes is also chairman of the FAI's Aero Modeling Commission subcommittee for model aerostats. And any of you who may have been involved in airship or aerostat modeling will have seen Johannes running around at these competitions representing the FAI and giving people awards when they deserve it. So welcome, Johannes. Thank you very much for joining us for the debate. Next, we have Martin Hill. Martin is the secretary of the Airship Association and has done a sterling job for many years at keeping us all in line and doing the minutes of our meetings and making sure we stay legal. So thank you for joining the debate, Martin. Martin is also a modeler himself and has been involved in many of Johannes's competitions over the years. And last, but by no means least, we have Danny Ford. Danny is a flight instructor at the British School of Aerobatics in East Anglia. But what's much more important about Danny is that he's an aspiring airship pilot. And I suspect he won't be doing too many aerobatics when he transitions to airships, I hope. But thank you very much, Danny, for joining the debate today. So there we have our panel, ladies and gentlemen. But the panel will not be the only people participating. We very much hope that each of you will participate. And the way to do that, the best way to do that, is by leaving messages in the chat on Facebook or on LinkedIn if you can. And if neither of those work, you can always send a direct message on WhatsApp, if you have his contact details, to the editor of Airship, Alan Shrimpton, who is not on the panel, but has the arduous task of gathering questions and feeding them to me and the panel as we go through the debate. So thank you, Alan, for supporting us. The final thanks I'd like to make before we go much further is to Dean Arnett. Dean, also a council member and a very well-established documentary filmmaker in his own right, and a teacher of filmmaking, has made these live debates possible by his understanding of video and broadcast technology. So Dean, thank you very much indeed for acting as director and producer and keeping us all up to speed with this modern technology. But before we actually get into the debate and start going through the various topics we have lined up, and there are 10 of them today, so we're going to cover a lot of ground. I thought for those of you who may not be members of the Airship Association, we should talk a little bit about what the Airship Association is. So, Dean, let's show everybody what the Airship Association is before we go any further. The Airship Association is a not-for-profit company. It was established in 1971 under the sponsorship of a group of members of Parliament to promote the science and art of airships. Roughly 1 cubic meter of helium can lift 1 kilogram. And what that means is that once you've contained a large quantity of helium in the envelope of an airship, you are effectively getting free lift. And it's that concept of just floating freely through the air that leads people to the view that airships have a role to play. This group of members of Parliament involved with the Parliamentary Aerospace League got together and said, you know, modern airplanes and helicopters have come on a long way. The airship has been left behind. We need to change that. We need to do something about it. And that the era of airships was not over. And the Airship Association, when it began, was very specifically looking at modern and future airships, not at the history, and have worked with airship companies and regulators and governments around the world to try and promote the science and art and understanding of airships. The Airship Association has always provided a public resource in terms of information about airships that is objective and clear and with sufficient technical background to have or to provide an understanding of the limitations, capabilities and advantages of airships. In addition, we have consistently published our quarterly journal, Airship, which publishes information about airship projects that are underway or are planned. And in addition to that, we hold conferences and conventions periodically, which we've held all over the world. And those provide an opportunity for engineers with an interest or an involvement with airships to come together and present the work that they've been doing. We're not an expensive organization to join, either as a private or a corporate member, much less expensive than most societies and associations that represent an industry, as we do. And we're all volunteers. Okay, so we have a packed program for you today. I'm going to list now the 10 topics that we're going to cover so you can decide which bits you're going to be most interested in. But before I do, any of you who are involved in the airship industry itself at the moment, please make sure you're sitting down because I'm about to mention the H word. Yes, that one. So our first topic, I did say we'd be grabbing this by the horns, is that surely, airships don't really work. They just catch fire. And they all stopped when the Hindenburg burnt to flames and it was a disaster. And surely that's all that airships are remembered for. So that's the first topic. The second topic is about helium. Helium is extremely expensive, And it's in very short supply, especially over the last few months. And it's going to take a long time for helium to come back to full-scale availability after the current geopolitical situation calms down. So if we're using helium, isn't that a problem? Topic number 3. Airships are too slow to ever pose a green alternative to modern-day aircraft. You know, if they're so slow, what can they do that is better than an airplane? Topic number 4. Airships can't fly in bad weather, can they? I mean, why would they? Topic number 5. Oh, airships are just old technology. It's that simple. Why bother with them? Topic number 6. What could airships be used for? What practical uses could they possibly have in the modern world? Topic number 7. When you think of the amount of energy needed for such a large aircraft to push through the air with all that drag, are they actually a green alternative to other types of aviation? And, you know, the complexity and materials used in manufacturing, that must consume a lot of energy. So are they really green? Topic number 8. Both capital expenditure and operational expenditure for airships are so high that surely their costs are high enough to make them unviable as an economic option, as a commercial option. Topic number 9. Let's talk about ground crew logistics. You know, the old airships had hundreds of people pulling on ropes. Surely it's not cost effective or even feasible to repeat that in the modern world. And if you can't have hundreds of people holding ropes, you know, how do you manage the logistics of airships on the ground? And topic number 10, this is a big topic and worthy of a lot of thought. Where do you manufacture them? Where do you keep them? Surely the cost of the sheds or hangars that you might have to use and the amount of land they use up, plus the operating area you need, render airships just not an option to consider. So those are the topics we're going to be covering, and we'll get through them all one way or another, and we'll allow debate amongst the panel members, but we will also encourage questions and comments from the audience. As I said, those will be fed to me and the panel, and we will then respond to those questions and comments as best we can. And please keep them coming throughout the debate. But before we get into the actual debate, there's one thing that I would like to encourage. Many of you watching may well be members of the Airship Association, but even if there are one or two of you who are not, I would strongly encourage you to join us. We're not just for people who are involved with airships. We're not just for people who are engineers or historians. We have a place for everyone with an interest in airships, or even if you're a potential investor looking to fund an airship project. Join the Airship Association and we can help you understand what's out there and what makes sense, and provide an independent, objective source of information about airships to all comers. Right. So, thank you all of you who are following. We have, I think, a number of people following in their 20s, not age 20, but you know, more than 20 people following live, which I'm quite happy about. Our last video, which was a trial, we only had a small number of people watching live, but we ended up with more than 600 views of that short video. So I'm hopeful that this time the combination of live and recorded watches will be much higher. And do encourage your friends to participate. So now let's go to the panel and debate the first topic. And just a reminder, the Hindenburg. Gentlemen, talk to us about the Hindenburg. Now, as our only German representative on the panel, I'm going to begin this one by going to somebody who actually has worked for the Zeppelin company. Johannes Eising. Talk to us about the Hindenburg. Surely airships died then, didn't they?
Yeah, everyone would think, okay, the Hindenburg exploded, as they say, and yes, there was an accident, and it's accidents if you look at aviation safety, and if you do so, it was not as fatal as
Right. Ladies and gentlemen, we seem to be having some problem with Johannes's signal,
from.
so we'll come back to Johannes, and I'm going to go instead to our airship historian for his comments on the Hindenburg. Giles, tell us about your views. Did airships end with the Hindenburg? What went wrong?
Well, they didn't end with the Hindenburg because the Hindenburg had a sister ship which was exactly the same size, and that made several flights. Everybody's forgotten all about that sort of thing. And of course, what happened? It really was the end of the big rigid ships, and what we have left with now are what so-called blimps, which are single chambers. The Zeppelins had a rigid frame and contained many chambers holding gas. In those days, it was hydrogen. But the blimps then took over and they reigned supreme. And so all the airships that you see today at sports events are blimps, advertising
Well,
and carrying
but
capture
Giles,
platforms.
what about Pathfinder One in San Francisco? That's not a single gas containment, is it?
There
Isn't
have
that an
been,
attempt to go back to the days of the large airship?
well, the thing is that the blimps have great disadvantages. The thing is that when you say the word airship, people have a fixed vision of the Hindenburg, but there are many different sorts of airships. There's the blimps, there's the rigid frame Zeppelins, then there's a hybrid between the two called a semi-rigid, which made many successful flights, including this year we're celebrating the Norga or Norge, which flew from Italy and stopped here in Britain at Pullum, and then went on up to Norway and then crossed the Arctic in 100 years ago. So that was a semi-rigid airship. And then, of course, the modern ones, you've got thermal airships, hot air airships. So there's also, it's a broad church. There's all sorts of different things. And they have advantages and disadvantages for doing different things. People see the Hindenburg and think, oh, it was a great disaster. And there's a lot of historians parrot this thing that it was on its maiden flight, but it wasn't. It had made 66 flights. It had flown the Atlantic 60 times in the previous year. It flew in that same year, 1937, when it came to its unfortunate end. It had already flown to South America and back. It was the maiden flight to North America. But if you're going to say a maiden flight every year, then Concorde must have made maiden flights to Bahrain and maiden flights to Cape Town and maiden flights. I
So,
mean, it's nonsense.
so
So it's
Giles,
not a maiden flight. It
so,
was actually a very successful airship.
so Giles, let me turn to another panel member. Danny, as a pilot, would you have been happy to pilot the Hindenburg on that flight? Would you have made any different decisions, do you think? You're muted, Danny.
Apologies. I would say that I wouldn't be particularly happy to go back and fly any aircraft in that period, let alone airships. I think we do forget that air travel at the time wasn't as safe as it is today, and there were quite a lot of things in the air falling apart or bursting into flames. So I think that would be my answer to that one.
Thank you. I think that's a very good point, Danny, actually. That brings it into context. And Johannes, now that I can see your image moving around, let's come back to you. We lost you because we had a bad signal. But if you could say a little bit of what you were saying before again and then carry on. What's your view of the Hindenburg? Was that the end of giant airships?
Yes, as Giles already said, it was a very successful and a very safe airship. And if you look at the safety record of airships in general, you see that accidents were very rare, and yes, it did not end. The era of airships did not end. The U.S. Navy operated 200 or so for scouting operations and for submarine spotting, and it did not end in World War II, and Germany was looking back then for other types of aircraft, unfortunately, and so the large airships in Germany and the airship hangars were teared down in favor of other types of aircraft.
Thank you very much, Johannes. That puts it in context. So, Martin, as somebody who's been making model airships for a number of years, would you put hydrogen into model airships? Do you think hydrogen can be used safely?
Well, funny enough, that question, I am actually doing some work, my own work actually, on the concept of the hydrogen ballonnet, i.e. a helium-filled airship with a helium bag, if you like, storage inside. And in actual fact,
Hydrogen
just talking
inside.
about hydrogen inside, the helium airship with hydrogen inside. And in actual fact, talking about the Hindenburg, of course, the original design, I'm sure as Giles and Johannes would agree, was actually a hybrid. It was a hydrogen bag inside helium cells. That was the original design in the early 1930s of the Hindenburg. But it's only when they couldn't obtain the helium from the United States that they went back to a fully inflated with hydrogen. And there was some concerns, historians have said, about the way the gas was released through a long sort of tunnel, if you like, pipe up from the middle of the cell up to the top of the hull, which was there to vent when they had this combination of a hydrogen cell inside a helium. And there's some concerns over that design and as a technical fault, if you like. But yes, I think this whole question of hydrogen, helium, I think what we need is some engineering research, if you like, on some experimentation on the risks, etc. We now have much better sensors than they ever had in the 1930s. We can detect minute amounts of hydrogen that leaked, etc. So I think there's a whole area there that we could look into for the future, and hopefully it's something maybe with Pathfinder 1 we could look into that.
Thank you very much, Martin. So I'm now going to throw a question open to the panel, and if you want to answer it, stick your hand up, and we'll pick somebody with their hand up. So we've talked a bit about the Hindenburg itself and the context around which the Hindenburg accident happened. We've talked a little bit about the fact that instruments are much better now, and we're using helium anyway. But I mean, something I'd like to introduce is the fact that the Hindenburg equivalent today would be the wings falling off an A380 at about 1,000 feet. Were that to happen, I don't think anybody would walk away from that A380. Now, obviously, certification standards are such that couldn't possibly happen. But back in the 1930s, they were not so. And what people tend to forget is that there were 97 passengers and crew on the Hindenburg. 35 of them survived and led full lives after that. And so actually it speaks volumes for the quality of engineering of the Zeppelin company at the time that it wasn't a complete loss. But what I would like to ask the panel is if, Giles, you want to make a comment on that.
Yes, one of the problems that the Hindenburg has is the timing of technology other than airships, because it was at a time when film was just coming into its being. And everybody's heard the radio commentator say, oh, the humanity. But he actually went on later to say, I hope I didn't, that wasn't as bad as I made it sound. And the problem is that there have only ever been about a dozen really big airship disasters, so to speak. And a lot of people walked away from them, but they've always been hugely publicized. because they are so spectacular. And so they've always made the newspapers. Whereas airships have gone a long history. They go back to 1784, and they have achieved many triumphs. And what the U.S. Navy blimps did in the Second World War, they had amazing achievements, but they were military secrets, so no one's ever heard of them. So the Hindenburg just suffered greatly because of that publicity. And everybody's seen the film, and they keep bringing it out. Anytime the airship is mentioned in the media, up comes the Hindenburg. And there have actually been very few crashes, and airships are incredibly safe.
I thank you for that. You're absolutely correct. So getting back to the question I wanted to ask everybody is, if you had unlimited resources and could do so cost effectively, would you build a hydrogen airship today? Would you take the risk? Do you think that's even something worthy of consideration? Let's go with Johannes first.
Yeah, I would say, if you think about operating costs on hydrogen and helium, hydrogen would be probably less expensive. It just takes an effort for certification. So, and if you ask the authorities, the airworthiness authorities, I remember a panel discussion we had on a conference in Cologne, I think, where someone from the German airworthiness authority said, for this question, we are not emotional about it, and we are willing to discuss. Just show us an equivalent level of safety. So it's a typical answer from one of the airworthiness authorities, and it means if you can show that you can operate hydrogen as safe as helium, then there is actually no issue. And I think this can be achieved, it can be done. Technically, it just comes with effort for systems and safety training, and to keep like the safety management within the operations effective. And this comes with cost. So you cannot only compare just the cost of helium and the cost of hydrogen. You must also say, okay, in terms of operating a hydrogen airship, what are the efforts and the cost for the systems? And I think the bottom line would be, yes, hydrogen can be cheaper. It's just an effort of certification that needs to be overcome.
Thank you very much for that, Giles. That's exactly the answer I was hoping to hear from you. One of our listeners has pointed out to me that I got my information wrong. Trying to read a piece of paper whilst talking to camera is not good. It was actually altogether 36 fatalities in the air and on the ground, and 66 survivors from the passengers and crew on the Hindenburg. So my apologies. I'm not an airship historian. That's my excuse. But Danny, if you were asked to pilot a hydrogen-filled airship today, would you?
An airship designed to, as we said, modern standards, with certification being as rigorous as it is today. Yes, I would, just in the same way that I'd be pretty happy flying an airliner with thousands of pounds of kerosene in the wings. So yes, I would feel safe with that.
So there's hope for hydrogen yet, everybody. That's good to hear. And we should all, as a community, encourage everybody to set aside that video of the Hindenburg and move forward in unison to a future of giant airships filled with both helium and hydrogen. Right, let's, in the absence of any questions from our audience, I haven't seen any yet on this topic, let's move on to the next topic, which is to talk actually about helium. Now, we've all seen in the last few months that helium supply from the largest source of helium in the world today, Qatar, has been effectively stopped. And helium production in the main is a byproduct of natural gas. So what do the panel think about the cost effectiveness of using helium as a lifting gas for airships, and what could be done to improve the viability of helium-filled airships. Martin, any thoughts on helium?
Right. Okay. As we were talking about the history of the Airship Association, we did have a chairman who was, of course, involved with the helium supply industry at one stage. So we did have some very good presentations on helium supply. And helium supply is just a classic supply and demand scenario. But what's interesting over the last about 5 to 10 years, there has been some exploration around the world about alternative helium supplies. I think some of you may know about some in Africa. They're actually producing helium, I think, in South Africa from one supply, and I think in Canada and North America, possibly Australia. So there are some alternatives to Qatar, but you're absolutely correct. Qatar is now the focus of helium supply, and it's obviously very difficult at the moment with the situation in that region. But there is hope of newer sources of helium, and helium that's not associated with natural gas or even oil. So it'd be interesting to see how these supplies come online. Certainly the price has gone up. When the price of anything goes up, surprise, surprise, companies and entrepreneurs come along to try and exploit that price potential. So the price of helium going up is not always bad for supply. It may actually end up reducing the price eventually when obviously they tackle new supplies. So that's one thought on that. In terms of hydrogen, as I said before, this combination of a helium cell or a hydrogen cell within a helium cell is something of merit to look into. And remember, hydrogen is not just a lifting gas. It's also an energy source for your propulsion system on your airship via a fuel cell. And there are certain advantages to this. They run at a temperature, they're more efficient, and they also produce when you look at what you get out of a fuel cell, it produces very useful things for an airship, not just electricity. There's a certain amount of heat that could be utilized, but not a very high temperature compared to an internal combustion engine. But you can also utilize the water, the pure water that's produced from the exhaust. And what you're left with, once you take the water out of the exhaust, is nitrogen, an inert gas. And if you're going to be handling hydrogen in an airship, it may be quite useful to have some onboard nitrogen supply to flush pipes and tubes and things, etc. So I think there's some work there and some ideas there. And I think Pathfinder 1 have looked into hydrogen as a fuel source in their fuel cells, because obviously they've got an electric powered airship. Currently it's powered by diesel, electric batteries, etc. to the electric motors. But there's a lot of work there, I think, that could be looked into about the use of hydrogen, not just as a lifting gas, but as a fuel.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Martin. That's great. Does anybody else want to particularly make any comments about helium? We've had quite a lengthy discussion now about hydrogen and helium. Giles, go for it.
Yes, helium is actually decayed alpha particles. And if we crack fusion reaction, it will be a byproduct.
Oh, that's good to know. So once we have fusion power powering our homes and everything else, there'll be an abundance of helium. Well, let's encourage everybody to get a move on getting fusion going properly then. It'll be certainly good for the airship community. But what I'm actually going to do is move on to our next topic, if you don't mind, everybody. And that is the topic of speed. Surely airships can't compete in any market with modern airplanes because they're so slow. Danny, you fly a slow airplane, don't you? Do you compete with airliners in your slow airplane?
It's different uses for different aircraft, isn't it? I think you could maybe look at a parallel with perhaps the increasing popularity with cycling as an alternative to the car. Sometimes speed isn't everything, and people are willing to sacrifice a little bit of convenience for benefits in other areas. So cycling, it may be health, or sustainability for airships. It may be sustainability as well as perhaps other things like having a more comfortable ride, or having a better view if it's lower down. So also, I believe hybrid air vehicles talks a lot about how airship travel could be a lot more convenient in terms of the ground infrastructure. You turn up at the airport, you don't have to go through a massive security queue. You turn up and basically go. You might not be all the way out of the city. You might be at a dock in the middle of the river in, say, by the London Eye in London. So sometimes speed isn't everything.
Thank you for that, Danny. That's a good point. Johannes, you've looked at lots of different airship designs in the past. What's your comment on the fact that they simply can't compete as a green alternative to modern aircraft because of their speed?
Well, they say in the heydays of airships, they have been the Concorde of their time. They were faster than cruise ships, and the fastest way for Atlantic crossings. But today, of course, you could not compete with a Concorde type of airplane, or even with other transport airplanes. The point is where the absolute speed is not the top level requirement. Airships are pretty good. I think we will come to this later in terms of efficiency. So if you're not looking for speed, but if you're looking for flying low and slow and have the capability of vertical takeoff and landing, they can absolutely compete, I think.
Okay, thank you very much. Giles, I think you had your hand up.
Yes, if speed is the criteria, then what use are helicopters? They can only go about 120 miles an hour. You can't ever get them faster because the approaching rotor and retreating rotor, you get differential lift on side of it. So I'm told that 120 miles an hour is about a limit for helicopters, but they've got plenty of
Well,
uses. You
well,
don't carry, you don't take people across the Atlantic Ocean in them.
Giles, they do go a bit faster now.
Do
I
they?
suspect you're
Okay,
thinking back to the Chitty Chitty Bang Bang days. But
probably.
you can get helicopters at a couple of hundred knots in
Mhm.
certain circumstances. It's still a lot slower than mainstream airplanes, and probably they go faster than airships. But I think the thing about speed and the data point that you have to compare with is endurance, because as has been said already in this discussion, speed is not the be all and end all. You don't have to be fast in all circumstances, but what you have to be able to do is fly for long periods without having to refuel. And airship endurance is often, with current airships, limited by crew duty time, because the airship itself could probably fly in excess of 24 hours, but the crew can't under current crew legislation. So I'd like to bring this back to Danny, actually. I mean, if you can, I'm not going to test your aeronautical law knowledge exactly, Danny, but crew duty time is something that is a legal requirement in all modern aviation, right? So what sort of periods can you fly for before you have to take a break?
So before you have to take a break, probably around 4 to 5 hours. I mean, my school has its own policies, so they'll be slightly different. And again, it will be slightly different if we go up to airliners. But yeah, I don't think that would be so much of an issue though if we're talking about endurance and how long the pilots could fly themselves. Because if you've got a lot of space on board and space doesn't come as so much of a premium, then surely there's a lot more space to have rest areas for the crew. I know obviously on modern airliners you need to find lots of spaces to squeeze everyone around in very uncomfortable little bunks, but I would have thought that wouldn't be so much of an issue there if space isn't at a premium.
Right. So really, crew duty time doesn't necessarily have to be such a big issue, meaning that you can really take advantage of the endurance that airships offer. So that would make them competitive in a number of areas. We're going to have a future debate. Go on,
I think you
Giles.
see need I think you need to see airships not as aircraft, but as flying ships. Now, people stay on board ships for years without getting off. You need to change the regulations, and there's no reason why on a big rigid ships they had hammocks, they had bunks, they had mess rooms where they could go and eat, and restaurants and canteens. And the engines are all outboard, so you're getting away from all the noise. But everything is so dominated by the fixed wing aircraft at the moment that it's very difficult to get the authorities to see beyond these rules and regulations. But the modern blimps fall into the same category because you can't get away. And someone who was an airship pilot once said to me something I've always rather liked: the modern blimps are rubber dinghies. They go trips around the bay. What we need are the great big rigid ships that can go voyaging across the oceans. That's not to say the blimps haven't done some spectacular things. And one of the US Navy blimps of the Second World War flew for 11 days without refueling. But a lot of that, a lot of their achievements, as I say, have been forgotten because they were military. There was military secrets all on the Cold War at the time.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for that, Charles. That's a really important thing to point out, that there are direct comparisons between airships and maritime vessels, not just the name. And perhaps it's a change of mindset that we need. That's something I think we should look at it in a future debate. What I'm going to do now, I think, is take us to the next topic, which relates to some of the long endurance flights that I'm familiar with that took place in the 50s, and that is weather. Airliners push through bad weather, fly around it, can react to changes in atmospheric conditions very quickly. Airships can't. So there is this view that if it rains or if there's a bit of snow or if the wind is too strong, airships are dead in the water. Is that true? Martin?
Right. Well, let's just look at history for a second. I know we've talked quite a bit about the Hindenburg, etc., but we're all probably aware of what happened to the US rigids, the Shandor, the Akron, and the Macron, and how they were caught out with weather conditions. In fact, all three of them, in a way, were caught out with weather conditions which weren't suitable for their structure. Things are so different today. We have so much better weather forecasting now than we ever had in the 1930s. And we have a much better understanding of the structured materials and the stresses and strains, etc., and what those materials can actually withstand. So I think this discussion on weather and airships it boils down really to what commercial operation we're talking about. Now, if we're talking about commercial passenger flying, then I think there is a bit of an issue about delays due to weather, etc., causing delays to a schedule. But we all know that in many ways that's not possibly the main market for airships. And you've got to think about the sort of cargo to remote regions. Now, the question is, what is the alternative to that? Let's say, the airship's going to get delayed by 1 or 2 days because of a storm front coming through, etc., and it's going to delay my cargo. Well, the alternative is to wait 5 years to build a road or a railway or a runway or get the planning permission to build that. So please, when we talk about weather and whether airships can get delayed by the weather, yes, it may happen. But if it's doing a job that nothing else can do, delivering something to a remote part of the world, which currently is not served by any means of transport, then the delay of 24 hours is just basically irrelevant. And so bear that in mind.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Martin. I'd like to turn to Johannes now on the subject of weather. I mean, when you were involved in the design of the Zeppelin NT, how did you tackle weather? I mean, what certification basis did you use, and was that an influence on the airship's ability to handle weather?
Issue of operations. So the average age of the Zeppelin NT passengers is pretty high. So you have a lot of seniors getting it as a gift, getting a flight as a gift from their families. So they are doing a lot of onboardings, and there they really have to restrict when they are operating. And they are also looking at fog, for example. They are doing tourist flights.
We're losing Johannes there, so I'm going to go to Danny to ask about certification of aircraft in the context of weather. Obviously, airplanes have to meet stringent standards. Is that also true of airships when it comes to weather management?
Well, I was actually hoping to bring up a slightly different point with so hybrid air vehicles did a feasibility study. Apologies for Maurice walking in front of the camera, where as part of it they looked at weather at I think it's a dozen or so, maybe 13 key sites in the Highlands and Islands in Scotland. So famously not fantastic weather. And they looked at historical data, the METARs over a decade at each of those sites, and they found that for the Airlander 10, the dispatch percentage, the days at which the aircraft would be able to be dispatched, was over 90%. For nearly all of the sites, off the top of my head, one of them was around 60%. So, I mean, obviously, we can debate whether that's an airship or not. They would rather not call it such. But it suggests that perhaps weather isn't as damning a factor as we might think it, as a lot of people would say it could be for airships.
Right. Thank you very much for that, Danny. Johannes has gone to find a better internet for him to connect more reliably, it seems, but that's fine. What I would like to do is make a comment to our listeners and viewers. We're having some technical difficulties seeing all of your fantastic comments. I am told that there are some amazing comments, and do please keep them coming. If we're not able to answer the comments during the live feed, we will answer them after the event. But we're going to continue to work to get access to the comments for the panel members and for us. I'm told we have around 25 people watching live at the moment on Facebook, which is great. But I'm also told that you've been making some excellent comments. And so for that, thank you very much. I look forward to reading them in due course. Hopefully we'll be able to access the comments and any questions you may have shortly. But I want to move on from weather and just raise a myth that a lot of people I've heard saying on occasions when I've been talking to people about airships, oh, airships are just old technology. Why bother? It's all old hat. We don't need them anymore. Why can't we just have modern airplanes? So for that, I'd like to go to Giles when he's finished eating his biscuit. Giles, is it all old technology? Or is there a real
No, it's not.
opportunity for airships today?
No, there are. This is a very interesting topic because if you look at the history, go right back to the very beginning. The first attempts at airships, they didn't have engines. They had no means of propelling anything forward. And airships actually had to wait 100 years before engines were light enough and robust enough to fly. At which point Alberto Santos Dumont in Paris flew blimps and Count Zeppelin flew the rigids. So you've got this idea, this concept, and it's quite possible that there are still things we need. And it's almost impossible to envisage what they might be until they appear. But there have been, since the Hindenburg, massive development of fabric technology. And it would be perfectly possible to rebuild the Hindenburg, fill it with hydrogen, and put the hydrogen in completely fireproof bags. And Addison Bain put forward the theory that the outer cover of the Hindenburg was a major contributor to the disaster because it was essentially rocket fuel. It was a canvas cover, a cotton fabric cover, and it was covered with dope, which was eventually aluminium dust and nitrocellulose dope, and it burned incredibly well. And if you watch the film, you can see the outer cover the flame races along the outer cover. And if the internal bags had been not the burning fabric falling onto the internal bags, which wouldn't catch fire, then you wouldn't have lost the lift. So the whole thing is got, there's so much different technology now. And of course, engines are better. We've got fuel cells. And there's the long time people have been talking about putting solar panels on airships and using electrical power. And there are experiments going, and people have done a lot of experiments over history. And a lot of this has got forgotten. This is one of my bugbears, is that so much is sleeping in the archives, and people don't go looking for it. They start with a sheet of blank paper and start reinventing the wheel again. There are many answers to some of these problems in the archives.
Okay, Giles, thank you very much indeed for that. I'm going to pause our discussion on the topics because I've now been sent some of the comments you people have been making who are listening and watching, and I'd like to go through them here. Quite a while back, Peter Fryer asked, what's wrong on LinkedIn? Our apologies for not being able to broadcast live on LinkedIn, but we will be posting a link to the video of this on LinkedIn after the event, and we will continue to work on making future debates live on LinkedIn as well. Thank you for your comment, Peter. Chris Pocock. Hi, Chris. Very happy to see that you're watching. About half an hour ago, I hope you're still watching, you asked how long are we planning for this to last? We've got about another hour to go, as far as I can understand it, at which point we'll be calling it a day. And we hope to get through as many of the topics as we can. If we don't finish them all, that's fine. We'll pick them up next time. But we will review, as we go through this series, the right number of topics to discuss each time. Philip Neuhaus, very nice to see that you've been watching, Philip. I hope you still are. And yes, you're right that the Hindenburg was not the last British airship. And I think either Giles or Johannes did mention that it had a sister ship that was continuing to fly after that. Mohsin Salim, salam alaikum, Mohsin. You asked Martin how the design is safe if it has hydrogen and helium. I think that's something we'll take up on a future debate, but it's a very interesting question. And I think there are definitely answers to it, which we will provide in due course. Paul Bolt. Hi, Paul. Nice to see you here. You're right. Nuclear fusion is the answer to the helium shortage. So bring it on as fast as possible. Go become a nuclear engineer, Paul, and help them get it done. Kyle Crawford, very nice to see you here with us. That's excellent. And yes, hydrogen is used. The Gordon Bennett balloon race, for example, uses hydrogen. And I think there have been a number of attempts to use hydrogen over the last several decades. But the challenge today is the legal position of the use of hydrogen as a lifting gas in manned airships that are produced generically. So perhaps that's a discussion topic for a future debate. So yes, Tudorica Marius Costel, your point about the patent for a gas that prevents hydrogen from igniting is a good one. I'm aware of at least 2 different efforts to make hydrogen inert by using additives. That's absolutely something that should be considered in the future. Yes, Thomas McCraw, thank you for joining. It is correct that there have been a number of interesting helium deposits found in recent years, not only in North America, actually, but in Tanzania and in other parts of the world, where helium is not just a byproduct of other gas extraction. It's actually the majority, or nearly, not the majority, but so, for example, in Tanzania, there is a gas field which is, I think, 90% nitrogen and 10% helium, whereas normally you would have about 98% natural gas and about 2% helium. So that's a big advantage. And there are other mixes of gas in other parts of the world. Let me just read some more comments here. Jesse, Glenn, good to hear you on the debate, or see you on the debate. And yes, thank you for the accurate figures for crew duty time. That is 100 hours per 28 consecutive days is the limit on airliners, and 30 consecutive hours of rest per week are required. I think that these are very useful comments, and what we're going to do for future debates is find a way to be more interactive with our watchers and our listeners. But as I said earlier, we will answer all of these comments in due course. I have a question here. Charles has asked, hang on, I've lost it. Charles has asked, how does helium or any other gas lift an airship? Johannes, you're an engineer. Can you give us a sort of 2-minute presentation on how gas creates lift? Hannes, are you with us? No. Okay, so
I can take that.
yes, Giles, do you want
Yes,
to do a...
okay. Well, there's no such thing as a lifting gas. The hydrogen and helium don't generate lift. What lifts a balloon or an airship full of this lightweight gas is gravity. Gravity pulls the air molecules down because they're heavier and they flow in underneath the gas. It's the same way as if you take a bubble of air and put it in a bucket of water. The air doesn't develop lift. It wants to rise to the top because the water pushes it up by rushing underneath it. And it's exactly the same process. The air, the surrounding nitrogen, and the other gases mixed with it, oxygen and argon and all the others, are heavier than helium and hydrogen. There are one or two things that are slightly lighter, which are interesting. One is anhydrous ammonia, which is used in farming as a fertilizer. That is lighter than air, but you have to wear gas masks because it's deadly poisonous if you breathe it. And it also takes all the moisture out of you. It's I can't remember what the word is, but it pulls all the, if it blows across your eyes, it takes the moisture off them. So it's not good stuff.
Lovely,
The other one, which is very interesting, which there's not been much work on, is water vapor, not steam. Not because water exists in several forms. It's ice, it's liquid, it's also liquid drops, which are clouds, but vapor is invisible. And water vapor is lighter than air. That's why clouds go up. So filling a balloon with water vapor would be interesting. It's actually quite difficult to do technically, but it's actually,
Yeah,
there are no lifting gases.
Giles, thank you very much. There was one word that I was hoping to get out of Johannes, and Johannes froze just at the key moment. I'm going to mention the word, and Johannes, could you please explain its relevance? Displacement.
Yes, so I hope my Giles is still speaking. I hope my connection works now.
You're good for the
No?
moment, yes.
Ah,
Yes,
okay,
yes,
displacement.
yes.
So yeah, it's like it works like the Archimedes buoyancy. So a body submerged in a fluid, be it water or be it air, uh, is exposed to the buoyancy of the ambient fluid. So if a body displaces like 1 cubic meter of air, it would actually see the buoyancy of the weight of 1 cubic meter of air, that is about 1.2 kilograms. And the
So,
so-called
so this
lifting
is where
gas,
we get. So this is where we get the rule of thumb that 1 cubic meter of helium generates enough lift for approximately a kilogram.
yeah, this is so you have the buoyancy of 1 cubic meter air, that is 1 point. Also, you have the weight, the actual weight of the helium, for example, that is 0.2 kilometer. So on the buoyant lift, less the weight of the lifting gas, then is so-called the 1 kilogram cubic.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I've got a couple more comments that I'd like to refer to, if I may. Charles Luffman would like us to be talking about cycloidal propellers or cyclorotors. They're not available off the shelf, and that is a very important topic for airships in the future, in my personal opinion, but it's not one we have time to discuss at length today. So, Charles, we will invite you to come back and talk to us about cycloidal propellers. But Johannes, you wanted to say something about them before we move on, correct?
Yeah, briefly. So at Cargolifter, we had a look at cycloidal propellers or sinusoidal propellers, and yes, they are very interesting, but also technically very demanding.
Thank you very much for that, Hannes. We will look at how demanding they are in a future debate. Dr. Rajkumar Pant, a very good friend of the Airship Association and a leading light in our industry, is asking why we can't lobby the regulatory bodies to give hydrogen a chance in airships. There is a worldwide push on the use of hydrogen as a fuel for locomotives and ground vehicles, and I will add to Dr. Pant's comments in aerospace as well. In fact, the UK Civil Aviation Authority are doing a lot of work on the use of hydrogen in airliners at the moment, and as are other bodies around the world, including the FAA. So yes, Dr. Pant, I think that one of the initiatives that we in the Airship Association should be pursuing is to get people to take hydrogen seriously, not only for other forms of transportation, but also for airships. Would anybody else on the panel like to comment on those questions I've raised? I'm going to go to you, Martin, first, because Hannes, we've had quite a lot of you over the last few minutes. Martin, go for it.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate what you just said there about hydrogen. Yes, there's a lot of research R&D going on around the world on hydrogen. I think it has a bit of a double-edged sword, though. We hear a lot about from hydrogen buses to powering planes, boats, cars, lorries, etc. But unfortunately, we also hear of failures of these systems, and it all comes down to the supply of hydrogen and the cost of that supply and how it's stored for transportation. And that's the issue. But the good news is, as you said, Gregory, there's a lot of R&D that the airship industry can lock into, if you like, and use that technology. Someone else's, if he's in a way spending the dollars on the R&D and that. So yes, I think there's great potential there. It's just, as you say, opening some doors, opening some eyes, opening some minds into how hydrogen could be used, not just as a lifting gas, but as a fuel for airships. And we can tag along to other uses of hydrogen in other industries, if you like. And also, Martin, I'll make one other point, sorry, before I finish. We're also starting to discover natural hydrogen sources, would you believe? So that's a possibility as well, a better supply of hydrogen.
Super. Thank you very much indeed for that, Martin. We're just over halfway through the allocated time for this debate. And of the 10 topics that we have listed to cover, we've covered 5. And in addition to those, we've answered some comments and questions from our audience. So I think we're doing okay. But it is now time to move on to the next topic, gentlemen, and any ladies watching or listening. And the next topic is, what real practical use can airships be used for? What can they do today that is unique or can't be done by anything else, or can be done better by an airship than anything else? Who'd like to take that on in the first instance? Johannes.
Yes, so we already said that airships are not the fastest aircraft ever, but if you're looking for missions where you need to fly low and slow, like for observations, ISR, and so on, and you need to have a vertical takeoff and landing, and you want long endurance or long range, this is where no other aircraft can compete. actually. You will have no airplane that can fly transatlantic and do a vertical takeoff and landing, and you will have no helicopter who can do this. So if you're looking at missions like this, or also if you want a mission where you do not want any downwash like a helicopter would produce, or noise or vibrations or so, this is where airships really can excel.
Thank you very much indeed for that, Johannes. Who else would like to make a comment about this? Danny, do you have any thoughts on what modern airships can be used for? Obviously not aerobatics, but
don't never say never. We don't know what people will be doing, but no, I'd say just have to look at some of the most some of the more exciting startups that we're seeing at the moment, like Kelu and Cloudline. Particularly, we've got I think we've also got someone in the comments as well representing Boosters as well, who's another startup doing this. Yes, so small airships, either for ISR, like Johannes mentioned, or surveying. I know that I think it was Cloudline was looking at wildlife and doing it without disturbing the wildlife, which is obviously very hard to do with a helicopter or fixed wing aircraft, particularly if you're flying low and slow. And also delivering, say, parcels, packages to remote areas, underserved communities with lacking infrastructure, small 5 kilo packages, no more than that. At the moment, we're seeing quite a lot of small companies, lots of startups getting into this space, which is quite exciting.
That is very exciting. It's very good news for airships in general. But I think in addition to the small airships, there might be some larger airship uses. Martin, do you want to look at that?
Yeah, I just want to one statistic which maybe you may or may not be aware of. 1/2 of the world's population has no direct access to a paved road. Just think about that for a second. 1/2 of the world's population. I mean, you open your front door in the morning, and in the developed country, you'll have a road which you pay taxes for, etc., to use, and you think nothing of it. But for those of you who live in other parts of the world, you probably shake your head and say, no, we don't have that facility. So just bear that in mind when we talking about cargo. If you don't have a decent road, then your society can't really generate revenue, income, develop, etc. as a country. And in fact, that's one of the big problems in many parts of the world, poorer parts of the world. They don't have decent infrastructure. Now, I'm not saying airships can be used in all cases there, but just dwell on that and think about that when it comes to cargo carrying airships and the difficulties we have in certain regions of the world.
That's a very important point, actually. And I mean, 3 of us on the panel at various times played various roles at cargo lifter. And I remember the cargo lifter view was that if airships can avoid the need for cross-modal transfers of logistics, that's the only advantage they need to really offer. Because at the moment, if you have to move a large generator from a factory in the middle of Germany to a remote site at a dam in the middle of India, the complications come on in the variety of different transport modes that you need to use. And so the theory was, and the genesis of cargo lifter was to cut all of those transfers out of the system and pick up the generator at the factory in Germany and fly direct over several days maybe to a remote facility in the middle of India. As things stand today, companies like Siemens have a massive logistics challenge because they have to close roads in Germany, they have to move power lines to get these huge industrial equipments to the port. You then need a massive crane to put it on the ship. The ship is fine, it gets to wherever it has to go, say in India. But once it gets to India, of course, the roads may not be designed for such heavy loads. The bridges certainly aren't. You have overhead bridges that restrict the movement of large cargo items. So it's an absolute nightmare for the delivery of these items. And there are very few alternatives to an airship that could do them if they were available. And I think one of the topics I'd like to get onto, not today, but on a day when Giles is on the panel, is the whole concept of load exchange that became quite a controversial topic in the old cargo lifter days. We're not going to have, for those of you listening and watching who are familiar with this debate, we're not going to have that today, because even though Johannes is in Germany and Giles is in England, they're not far enough apart to have this debate without sparks flying, I suspect. So we'll put that forward for another day. So be warned, guys, we are going to have that conversation. But I just wanted to raise another question asked by a gentleman, I think a gentleman called Prithvi, who said, what is the best shape for an airship? Prithvi Kapoor. Well, the best way for you to find out what the best shape for an airship is, if you're not already a member of the Airship Association, join, because I am assured by the editor of our journal, Airship, that there have been 2 articles in recent editions of Airship discussing very specifically shaping of airships. And I am aware that there are multiple different airship shapes. They generally look sort of, the larger they get, they become somewhat cigar-shaped. But there's a thing called the fineness ratio, Prithvi, which is the ratio between the length and the breadth of an airship. Obviously, if you are containing a gas, the most efficient shape for a gas containment is a sphere, because the surface area to volume ratio will be greatest in that shape. But a sphere doesn't go through the air very efficiently if you're driving it with engines. So you have to have a compromise shape. And Hannes, I'm going to ask you to speak briefly about shapes. I mean, there have been a lot of studies and wind tunnel tests and finite element analysis on airship shape. Is it still a debate and a design process moving forwards? Or do we know now the most efficient and cost-effective airship shapes?
Well, if you look at ships, or specifically on submarines, there are many different shapes around. It really, really depends on the mission. So for me, living in Hamburg, I see, like, every day on the River Elbe a very large floating crane. It sits on a pontoon and it does an incredible job in the harbor lifting heavy stuff. But you would never ever attempt to ship this crane across the Atlantic, for example, right? So it really depends on the mission. Do you want to be fast? Do you want to just float around? Or do you need a long endurance? Do you have more takeoff and landings? Or do you need long range missions? This really makes a difference, and it has a high impact on the optimum shape of an airship.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for that, Hannes. I'm going to go back to my list of topics, and we will come back to a couple of the questions and comments that have been made shortly. But we've been talking about what airships can be used for. We're actually probably going to have a separate debate in due course on uses for airships and what makes sense and what may not make sense. But so we've said enough about it for the moment. The drag. I want to talk about the drag. I referred to it briefly just now with the sphere, but perhaps Danny, you could talk about lift and drag and power requirements, because as we hear often, how can airships be an alternative when you factor in how much power is needed to overcome the massive drag that big envelope generates. Now, lift and drag applies to all flying vehicles. So can you give us some insight into its importance and how you can overcome it?
Well, I think when we're talking about, we obviously were just talking about airships being an older technology, but when we're applying modern technologies and methods to them, materials particularly, we can reduce the impact drag has significantly. So we're obviously talking about shape just now, but then we've got modern methods like computational fluid dynamics. We can optimize them. We can use wind tunnels, better, lighter materials, and more. Sorry, someone else have to take that off me. I'm not an expert.
That's all right. No, that's fantastic, Danny. And sorry, I wasn't. I was reading my notes when you were talking there. So, but what I would say is I completely agree that modern technologies can play a huge role in optimizing airship shape to reduce drag. It obviously will never go away, but distributed power, for example, where you have multiple propellers all over an airship, or there are a number of efforts that are being made. So I think the jury is still out as to whether there is one optimized shape. And as Johannes said, it sort of depends on the mission, right? And exactly how you want to use the airship. And that will drive the shape, and that will enable you to use the airship for a variety of different missions. So let's go to topic number 8, I think. Or Johannes, do you want to, before we do that, do you want to add anything to the comments we've just been making, Hannes?
Absolutely. I think one must not forget that half of the drag of an airliner is due to lift. So the lift over drag ratio is like the number that you need to look at when you look at endurance range of an aircraft. So be it an airship or an airplane. For an airplane, you have half of the drag being due to lift, and you do not have this when you fly an airship. And the result of this is that you, for example, for the same ton mileage you want to fly, so you have a payload of so and so many tons, and you fly it for so kilometers. With an airship, you need only 1/3 or 1/4 of the fuel to carry this payload over this range as compared to an airplane. So very efficient. And if you think about drag as referred to lift, you find that airships are much more efficient than airplanes.
Super. Thank you very much indeed, Johannes. That's good to know. I'd like to thank Thomas McCraw for his comment about, can we discuss heavy lift cargo airships? Yes, we sort of have a little bit in the discussion about, carrying big generators from Germany to India, but we will have some much longer debate about heavy cargo airships in our debate focused on the uses for airships and airship applications, which is in fact going to be our next debate, and we'll talk a little bit more about that towards the end of this debate. And I've also got, there's another question from Dr. Pant, Dr. Rajkumar Pant, who many of us on the panel know personally. And so I'm going to put it to the panel. What do each of you feel about multi-lobed airships? Giles, how many lobes is the right number? 1 or more?
Well, again, I think when you look at a lot of time and effort's been developed streamlining airships and coming up with stuff like that, but they fly low and slow. And what's forgotten is that the old straightforward pencils, which are just the straight-sided ones with a cone on each end, achieved many things. The R-34 flew quite happily twice across the Atlantic. And it did it with all the crew having bunks and hot food. And it did it at the time that our Alcock and Brown were sitting on a plank and coming across and crashing into a bog. There's nothing wrong with the pencils. And it's been argued that the problems the British had with the R100 and the 101, a very interesting paper, that they tried desperately hard to make these streamlined shapes, which tapered the cones at both ends. And had they filled the airship shed that they were building them in with the pencil shape, they wouldn't have had half the problems of lack of lift that they have. So I think there's a lot of fuss made about shape. And I personally don't have anything, but I'm not an engineer, or I can just tell you what's happened in the past.
Thank you very much for that, Giles. That's brilliant. Martin, 1 lobe or more lobes?
Well, I don't know if we've got anyone from HAV in the audience.
You have to explain. You have to explain, Martin, who HAV
hybrid air
are.
vehicles. Sorry, hybrid air vehicles.
Yes.
formerly ATG, formerly
And there's another
Airship
company
Industries.
that they're not the only ones with multi-lobe airships.
Yes, they're not the only one. Exactly.
So I think you were going to make a comment about HAV's design, right?
Well, I'm just to say that anyone there wants to raise a question on that. I'm not an engineer, aeronautical engineer and expertise, or work for HAV or anything like that. But they've obviously done a lot of work on this, and as Danny said, they've done some research on how they can cope with high winds, etc. And we have seen the HAV model fly. So yes, I think the debate is a little bit out on this, and I think it all comes down to the landing, the takeoff and landing, in terms of not requiring a traditional undercarriage. They have this sort of airbag structure, air cushion structure, and I know they think this is a great advantage to enable an airship to land on very rough surfaces, etc. So it's going to be interesting to see how this develops in the future, or whether how practical that is in the real world, rather than on computer simulations, etc. But yes, I think there's a lot of work in that, but it's probably proprietary, and I'm not sure we can all access that information.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for that, Martin. Hannes, most of the airships you've been involved with have been traditional shaped airships. Have you ever been involved with a multi-lobed airship? And if not,
no.
why not?
Well, it all boils down to requirements. So if you do a design for an aircraft, you look at the top level requirements, and one of these, for example, as Jive said, is what is the you have at hand. So if you have a hangar that is like not very high and has a wide gate, you might want to reduce the height of the airship, and then it gets flatter, and then it makes sense to make it like multi-lobed, as Professor Punt said. The point is, if you have a different shape, it makes everything more complex. And what you really don't want in aeronautical engineering is complexity. You really want to reduce the. I'm a big fan of like circular shapes because it makes life easier.
Thank you very much for that. We've got another question from Chris O'Kane, who asks whether an airship would be useful for mountain rescue. I think we're not going to debate that now or answer it. I think there might be some challenges for the use of airships in mountain rescue, but maybe there are some advantages as well. What we will do is shelve that particular question for our next debate, which is focused on the uses of airships. And by then we can all have thought about it a bit. And maybe, Chris, if you think that there is a use for airships in mountain rescue, Chris O'Kane, you can come and tell us how you think that might work. But in the meantime, let's move on to our next topic. Let me look down my list. Okay. Costs. This is about a combination of CapEx and OpEx, capital expenditure, operational expenditure, where the development costs, the ground support, and the running costs are just too high to make airships viable. Now, before I ask one of the panel to comment on this, I'm going to make one comment myself, which is that the challenge, or one of the many challenges that airships have faced in recent years, is that if you look at the amount of money spent on the development of conventional airplanes over the last century, and you compare that with the amount of money that has been spent on the research, development, and manufacturing of airships over that same period, they are orders of magnitude apart. And everybody seems to take the view that airships, because they're just a balloon, are simple to design and simple to operate, but that's not necessarily the case. If the same amount of money had been spent on airship development as has been spent on fixed wing development, I would suggest that we would see our skies full of airships today, because without that investment, it's very difficult to progress the technology. So I'm now going to ask the panel to comment on operating costs, development costs, and your thoughts on that. Who would like to go first? Danny, let's go with you.
Yeah. So I think obviously when we ask this question or when we say that airships are expensive to operate, we're comparing it with fixed wing. We're comparing it with heavy and air aircraft, and I mean what you said is correct. They've had a century of time to develop the ecosystem that airplanes operate within, and naturally you have the better economies of scale that go with that. But also, any new transport technology is going to have high costs at the beginning. So it's going to be small scale initially, limited infrastructure, and they're going to have to build these economies of scale. So I think perhaps this statement isn't quite fair in this case. And also,
Okay.
not all transport technologies are going to become cheaper. So, for example, helicopters are famously expensive to operate with ground crew as well. But that's accepted because they fill this niche for specialized operations, and we just accept that. And airships would be the same, I would say.
Okay. Thank you very much for that, Danny. That's great. Hannes, do you want to add something to that in terms of cost?
Yes, so if you look at the structure of direct operating cost for airships, it turns out that as compared to airplanes, where the lion's share is fuel and engine acquisition and maintenance, you find that for airships, this is really a minor role. So airships are quite less sensitive to the fuel price, for example, because they don't need that much fuel for the same ton mileage, as I said. And this is why you have to look at the capital cost, and capital cost is like acquisition cost for the airframe. And as I said, the acquisition costs for engines are not that high, so it really makes sense to lower the acquisition cost, and that means development cost and manufacturing cost of the airframe itself.
Okay. Thank you very much for that, Hannes. That's an excellent summary of the whole cost debate. We've got two topics left, and they're both important ones. In our AI-generated video at the beginning of this debate, you will have seen, hundreds of people walking around at one point. And if you look at the historical videos of the airships of the 30s, you had hundreds and hundreds of people holding ropes on the ground. So this topic is about ground crew logistics. How do you handle airships on the ground? And what is different today than in historical times to perhaps, hopefully, make it more user-friendly? Giles.
Well, this goes back to the previous ships. When you see one of the big old airships coming into land, you see hundreds of people running across the grass and grabbing hold of ropes. When you see a jumbo jet landing at an airfield, how many people are actually involved in landing that? All the air traffic controllers, all the baggage handlers, all the staff manning the desks, all the security people. It's no one ever counts that, but that's a cost of the ground side of things. And going back to airships, a lot of the historical stuff has again been forgotten. There were solutions to these things. The R100 flew in August 1930 to Canada on its 8th flight, and it crossed the airfield at Montreal, and it took 27 minutes before it was moored to a mooring tower that had never been used before, and 12 people did it. So I think if you I said before, you've got to think of them not as aircraft but as ships. Think of a aircraft carrier or a super tanker coming into a harbor. How many people moor it? I think 12 people isn't a bad number. And there are lots of other things that were tried and have been forgotten. Henry Ford built a mooring mast that had a railway down the side. So the idea was you moored the airship to the top of the mast and then you ran it down to ground level to do the loading. It was never used. So there are lots of things that have been tried. And the other thing, going back to what you said about development costs, there have only ever been about 1,000 airships in history since 1784. There aren't. It's quite difficult to come up with an exact number because people keep reusing bits. But there's only been about 1,000. And I asked the Royal Aeronautical Society historical group what was the 1,000th fixed wing aircraft, and they didn't know. They said probably talking about something that flew just before the First World War. So we're talking about an Avro 504, which is a wooden aircraft biplane. So in terms of experimental development, airships still have a long way to go. And as I said before, we're probably waiting for more things we don't know we need, stronger fabrics, who knows? There are lots and lots of things like that, but they got rid of ground crew extensively using mechanical machines. The U.S. Navy had these mules, they called them, which took the way from people, and there's a lot of things that people pick on the bad bits, and the good bits which are hidden in the archives, which I dug up, have all got forgotten.
Thank you very much for that, Giles. That's a very important point, actually, I think. What comes around goes around. I mean, I remember being involved in a ground handling system called a hydromast, the multi-headed creature from mythology. It was named after because it was designed to replace I think it was a 15-man ground crew for a Skyship 600 with 3 people, using hydraulics and electronics to grab it from the sky.
That is
The
true.
Ministry of
I
Defense
was
in the UK
involved.
actually,
Yeah,
yeah,
I was involved with the development of that. And it was actually developed from an idea that was put forward by Barnes Wallis in the 1920s and 30s of a mooring mast which had a sort of central bit in the middle, and then it had 2 arms sticking out on either side of it. But he didn't have hydraulics. And that's what
right.
I'm saying. We are probably missing bits of technology that will make life easier in the future.
Yeah, well, so the hydromast was built in, I think, 1993. It was tested on, I think, a couple of different airships. And, had that program continued, maybe we would have smaller ground crews today. But I hadn't appreciated it came out of Barnes Wallis, as so many aeronautical ideas did. Great. So, what I am going to do is refer back to the questions. Prithvi Kapoor has asked a new question. Do we have any information about the thermal airship from 1975, and is there any information on the topic? Okay, so thermal airships are a class of their own, and there have been quite a few of them made by a number of different manufacturers. So I'm not exactly sure which one you're referring to, but I'm going to go to Johannes to talk about that. Are you able to fill us in on the thermal airship of 1975, Hannes?
I think for me it's more relevant to go one step back to the Zeppelin NT that uses only 1 or 2 ground crew to land
Oh, sorry, the ground
or
crew discussion.
to
Yes,
start,
you're absolutely
right? And
yeah.
because the thermal airships, this is not really a big part of airship technology and history, but the ground crew is. And so the Zeppelin NT, where I worked for about 5 years in Friedrichshafen, they have just 1 or 2 ground crew to start and to land the airship, and because it's very, very maneuverable, so it has these 2 tilting propellers and also a tilting stern propeller and a lateral propeller, and it's very maneuverable. It's impressive if you see these 10 tons moving near the ground. But this is not, the end of the ladder, because I think this can be done much, much easier, much in a simpler way. So this is not the end of the technological development. So airships have become much, much more maneuverable, and the need for a large ground crew is definitely no longer there, and this is a big step in operating costs.
Thank you very much for that, Hannes. Forgive me for asking you to talk about thermal airships when you want to talk about ground crew. I missed that in the notes that I'm receiving on the side here. But Martin, you wanted to make a comment.
Just to reiterate what Johannes said there, just to bring it forward now to the Pathfinder 1, because I know there's limited video footage of the Pathfinder 1, but what I've seen of its takeoff and landing, again, very few, there's hardly anyone holding on any ropes, very maneuverable. So I think Johannes is actually right. We've actually, in some ways, solved that problem. Okay, how you do it, whether Zeppelin T is the best way of doing it, but it's demonstrated it. So I think moving forward, airships can be a lot more maneuverable. But you do have to distinguish between a takeoff, landing the field, and obviously going back into the hangar. There is where maybe the ground crew come in when you're actually moving it to where the airship is stored. But once it's actually out of the hangar on operating from the base or to the destination, then I think we've actually solved that problem to a greater extent. But it needs some fine-tuning.
That's really good to hear, Martin, and I think you're absolutely right. And for those listening or watching who may not be familiar with the Pathfinder 1, a company called LTA Research, funded by the Google founder Sergey Brin, has built Pathfinder 1 in the US and is flight testing it at the moment near San Francisco. It is the first large rigid airship since really, as far as I'm aware, the Second World War or pre-World War II. And it is not the end of his plans. There are plans for larger Pathfinders with more utility in the future. So it is interesting that they are using a small ground crew to handle them when they come into land. So what I do want to do is go back to the question about thermal airships that Prithvi Kapoor asked. And I think perhaps the best person to answer that would be you, Giles. Could you talk about thermal airships?
Well, yes, I was a commercial hot air balloon pilot, so I've done a bit of that as well. But I was just going to comment briefly on something Martin said, that getting airships into the shed, again, there's a forgotten technology that they had for moving the R100 into the shed with 2 winches and 6 people connected up 2 ropes, and then 2 winches pulled the airship into the shed. Never built, but all the designs exist. Anyway, thermal airships, yes, we have to go back to 1784, 1785, when the first person to fly in a hot air balloon, Pilatre de Rosier, came up with the idea of joining hydrogen and helium together. And he built the Rosier balloon, and it killed him. Now, we have to wait until Richard Branson and Bertrand Piccard and others are trying to fly a balloon around the world in the 1990s, because they were trying to make hot air balloons and gas balloons fly these long distances. They crossed the Atlantic, they crossed the Pacific. And the way they did it was to reinvent the Rosier, but they used helium. So you had a helium cell with a hot air balloon underneath it. And there are hot air airships. Mucki Boosmeier in Germany has done a lot of work developing hot air airships. And but I think that the future is a Rosier airship, and no one's yet built one. I think you need that. The problem with long duration flight is that your gas is warmed by the sun. And when the sun sets, you lose that lift. Now, with a gas balloon, you throw out ballast. With a hot air balloon, you burn fuel. And if you can use the hot air to heat the gas, that's the most efficient way of doing it. So I think that there is a great potential for a Rosier airship in the future. But again, I say there's so much that we've got new developments, but this mindset that airships are old-fashioned technology and don't work, aren't any use, is blocking development. And as you say, when you look at the amount of development money that's gone into aircraft since the Wright brothers flew, that we've had 1,000 airships in 245 years with very little development money.
Thank you very much for that, Giles. And that reiterates a really, really important point. So any of you listening or watching who would like to fund some more airship research and development, give us a call. We can certainly help you direct your money to the right people. So what I'd like to do is move on to our last topic. And if we could have everybody on the screen, because I want to have a vote. One of the things that is a big problem for airships, because airships by definition are big. We've heard about the 1 cubic meter creates enough lift for roughly 1 kilogram. So if an airship is going to be doing a job of work, which has to carry a lot, it's going to be big. And the buildings in which these are developed, built, stored, maintained, and so on are by definition very big. We at Cargo Lifter built the world's largest aircraft hangar. From memory, it was 360 meters long, 270 meters wide, and 105 meters high, with no supporting arches. So these are not small buildings, and therefore they're expensive. They could be described by non-airship enthusiasts as an eyesore. And there's some complexity to their construction as well. So I'd like to talk a bit about them, but before we do, the vote I want to take is this. In the English language, so Hannes, you may choose to not vote, but you're welcome to vote if you wish to. But in the English language, aircraft are stored in hangars. But historically, before hangars for airplanes were built, airships were stored in sheds, rather like a garden shed, but a bit bigger. So here's the vote I want to have between the panelists, including you, Danny. Should we call them hangars or should we call them sheds? All in favor of hangar, stick up your hand. All in favor of shed, stick up your hand. So it's 3-2. This panel, with the moderator, we believe it should be a shed, but the modern aviation pilot and engineer believe it should be a hangar. So I'd be interested to know what are the thoughts of the people watching and listening. Please comment in the comments. And if you're watching or listening after the event, let us know your thoughts. Is it a shed or a hangar? And who wants to talk about sheds and or hangars and the complexities of designing and building them? So I'll make a start. Cargo Lifter took a decision early on to build its hangar. And the purpose behind the hangar was twofold. It was not just to create a manufacturing base and an operating base for the Cargo Lifter airship that sadly was never built. It had a much more important early role to play because it was a very expensive building and quite sophisticated in its design and capabilities, with underfloor helium, underfloor electricity, underfloor pressurized gas, and so on. And it was vast, as you've heard. And people used to do base parachute jumps from inside the building. And we did hot air balloon flights inside the building. So that second purpose was to show the financial community and the aerospace community that Cargo Lifter was serious about what it was doing. Because we couldn't show them our airship flying, by building the hangar, it showed commitment, and it showed drive, and it showed intent. And so building that actually helped us raise the money that we then sadly ultimately ran out of. But it did give a message to the communities that we were engaged with that we weren't just a PowerPoint company. We actually did something. So who on the panel would like to take this up? Giles, perhaps?
Well, yes, I go back to what I said before, that they don't. We need to stop thinking of them as aircraft and think of them as ships. Ships aren't built in sheds or anything. Ships are built in dry docks. Why not build a maritime airship in a dry dock? There are thousands of them all over the world.
Yeah, good point. And in fact, I know that some of the submarine pens in the UK, in which these giant submarines are built are used for testing aerostats and, in the past, airships. So why not indeed? Johannes, do you want to talk a little bit about this?
Yeah, sure. So some airship developers or enthusiasts would try and tell you that you would not need a hangar for to build and operate and maintain an airship. And I think if it can be done, it would probably be horribly expensive because if you want to apply with the authorities to manufacturing an aeronautical manufacturing organization or an aeronautical maintenance organization, you really have to show how your procedures work or is safe and so.
Uh,
And I think you cannot do if you don't have a roof, right, or closed doors. So,
Yeah, I think, Hannes, we're losing you a little bit again, but I think you made
okay.
enough of your point. You made enough of your point for us to understand where you're going. So thank you very much indeed for that. Danny,
Gregory,
hangars. You've got hangars for your aerobatic airplanes.
I think Giles might do as well. I think Giles is popping up there. I can.
well,
No,
yeah,
come on.
I wanted to say that, in fact, there's a big misunderstanding. But Cardington is called a Cardington Sheds and Cardington Card Hangars, and it's both are correct because it was originally a shed when it had the airships in it. In the Second World War, the RAF put aircraft in it, so it became a hangar. So they're both correct. But the misunderstanding about it is that it's not a building. The way the airships were built, the big rigids, they were built in rings, and you had this ring of girders that went round, and you joined them with long sections. So you had the two together, and each one had a balloon in between. So they simply built arches like that and hang the ring in it. And then they built a series of really strong arches, and then they clad it to keep the weather out. So it isn't really a building, it's a jig.
So it's a piece of industrial tooling, really.
Exactly. But you can't,
That's a very
as
interesting
Cargo
point.
Lifter discovered, you cannot do that today because of health and safety and all the rest of it. You can't, you have to have heating and, everything else. But that's what the misunderstanding is, that it is actually designed, the building was part of building the airships.
Very good point. I think, Martin, you had your hand up.
Yeah, just briefly following on from what Johannes there and Giles said. In fact, when you bring this forward to Pathfinder, one of their first patents, and what they've actually done in terms of the construction of Pathfinder 1, is actually build these rings from the ground onwards and then rotate the whole ring and then put the next section in and rotate and rotate and rotate. The whole structure rotates, I think, except for the bow and stern cone, which are built separately and then attached. So they realized very early on that having people up very high ladders and etc. and hanging from the roof is not compliant with modern health and safety regulations for building construction, etc. But they have sort of solved the problem of actually how do you build a large rigid airship now by rotating the whole structure and working on it on the ground, if you like, etc. But obviously, the question of the hangar is something else. That's still up for debate, the cost of the hangar and where you build it. The only thing I would say about a hangar or a shed is that think of dual use and how long you're going to be building the airship. Therefore, once you've built it, is it just going to sit empty? Think about how it can be used commercially for other uses and work with partnerships with people, with companies who may want to use your space when you're not building an airship or not maintaining an airship. Just think of that to try and spread the cost, etc.
Well, thank you, Martin. Well, we know for sure that airship sheds or hangars can be used as film studios, as indeed one of the Cardington sheds is now a film studio. But moving on from that, I mean, back in the 90s, I remember an architect called Wendell R. Wendell, who was famous for geodesic structures, including in various casinos in Las Vegas. He came up with the idea, he loved the idea of airships. He wanted to build a geodesic airship structure, a rigid one. But what he also came up with was an idea of a theme park where you had two large hotels side by side, with an open space in the middle and a roof over it. And that open space would be the fabrication, construction, and parking space for a very large airship. And so you could rent a room in one of the two hotels with a window overlooking this airship construction in the space between the two hotels, which I thought was a brilliant idea for a novel way of helping to fund an airship development. So any of you airship companies out there listening or watching, we, the Airship Association, hold that as a trade secret of ours. We're happy to license you to build two hotels and construct airships in the middle. Come and talk to us about it. So time is moving on, and we've now talked about the last of our 10 topics for the day, and we've got a few minutes left. So what I'd like to do now is just talk a little bit about this series of debates and a few other topics. Thank you to our audience again for bearing with us for so long, and we will gradually improve these debates as we go through them. This is only the second time that the Airship Association has ever gone live for anything other than an in-person event. So bear with us as we get everything better as we go. Hopefully we'll manage to get LinkedIn up and running. But what's equally important is that these debates are all recorded and are made available for all comers after the event. So this Floating Ideas series will continue with our next planned live debate taking place on August the 8th at 3 p.m. British Summer Time. That's 4 p.m. Central European Time. And I'm not going to go through every time zone that you're all from, dear watchers and listeners, but you can work it out from that. I should say 2 p.m. GMT or UTC. And what we're going to be doing as our series of topics for that debate, which will be published in our social media and elsewhere before the debate, we're going to be talking about uses for airships, use cases, the variety of applications that can be suitable for airships and why, and how they offer a benefit over any other type of vehicle. So that's for August the 8th, and I hope you'll all join us there. And we will have a few new faces on the panel. We may have a larger number of panel members, we shall see. But what I wanted to do before we conclude is make a number of points. I'd like to talk again about membership of the Airship Association. I know that many of you watching at the moment are members, but maybe those who watch after the event are not yet members, and I would strongly encourage as many people as possible to join us. We are a voluntary organization. Our subscriptions cover the cost of everything that we do, plus a little bit of sponsorship for our events. We've talked about the next debate on August the 8th. We have our annual lunch, which any member can attend, and if you're a golden member, the lunch doesn't cost you anything. That will be taking place, details to be announced, in September in London. We have a conference later on in October, which will take place in Ottawa, Canada, which we're jointly mounting with the Canadian organization CanHave. We have our journal coming out every quarter for the rest of this year for you to read as well. So do become a member if you're not one already. I'd also like to make a shout out after we finish the membership thing, because I think membership is really important to enable us to achieve all of the things we want to achieve and to encourage people to participate on council as council members, as well as supporting us through their membership of the association. But I would like to make a shout out to a member of the association and close friend of the association, Max Pinucci. Max has been behind the centenary celebration that Giles referred to early in this debate of the flight of the Norge airship from Italy via the UK and Norway to the North Pole. It is recognized as the first human visit to the North Pole in history, And from an exploratory point of view, if that's a word, it was led by Ranulf Amundsen, the Norwegian explorer. It was funded from the US, but it was Umberto Nobile who designed the Norge in Italy and built it there. It was a semi-rigid airship, as Giles mentioned, and it's the centenary. So the Norge set off from Italy on the 11th of May. And on the 11th of May, Max Panucci, working with a number of other co-organizers, will be holding a dinner at the Italian Air Force Museum in Vigna de Valle off by Lake Bracciano, north of Rome. And that dinner will be celebrating the centenary of the Norge. And I encourage Max, wish him well for the dinner. Unfortunately, I'm not able to attend, and thank you very much for the invitation. But hopefully you will hear me comment in a recorded message at the dinner to congratulate you for all that you are achieving, to remember the Norge and its achievements, but also to look forwards into the future. So Danny has his hand up. Danny, would you like to say something?
Oh, that was actually for something earlier, but I mean, I would add that as well as our gold members, our corporate members do also get free tickets to our annual
Good.
dinner as well.
Thank you very much. That's a very important point because I haven't mentioned corporate membership. Of course, we are primarily comprised of individual members. We're all volunteers, but we do also have corporate members, and our corporate membership scheme is important because although the Airship Association will always remain neutral and unbiased towards any particular technology or any particular company, we encourage companies to use us as they can to support their activities, and we encourage them to support our activities. So please do join as a corporate member as and when you can. And obviously any member is invited to put themselves up for election to council. I will be announcing to our members shortly who our most recent appointee to council is, somebody who agreed to join council a matter of a few weeks ago. And we've got a lot of things going on in addition to what I've spoken about already in the years ahead. I'm going to ask the panel if you'd like to each make a few closing remarks about the Airship Association and about this debate. Let's start with you, Johannes.
Yes, I think what can I start about the number of spectators and guests and the subjects that have been discussed, and I'm really looking forward for the next event and hope I will have a better internet connection then.
We do too, Johannes, but it's great that you were able to join us today, and your comments were fantastic. Danny, would you like to make any last comments about the debate or the association as a whole? As our membership secretary, obviously, I've been pushing membership in this, and I'm sure you will too, but thank you for all the work you do towards our membership.
Thank you. Well, Alan's just put a link to for more information on our membership in the chat. I'm about to post a link as well with some other information. So anybody, please, who's interested, just take a look at that, and we'd be, really glad to see you join us. I'm personally just looking really forward to the future editions of this webinar series, and just to see what interesting panelists we can get up on here and really dig into some of the topics that Gregory touched on today. So yeah, thank you everybody for attending.
Thank you very much. Martin?
Yes, follow on from Danny said, yeah, I found this very interesting, and really looking forward to more detailed debates we're going to have in the future on certain topics. It's great to get some of these basic things, if you like, open up in the real world and discuss realities rather than fantasies. And yeah, looking forward to it. And well done for everyone who's organised this.
Thank you very much, Martin. Giles?
Well, I just shout out to the other thing that you get as a member is a copy of the journal, Airship Journal, which Alan Shrimpton does an amazing job of editing. And I am actually the editor of the sister organization, which is the Airship Heritage Trust. So I'm going to advertise the next magazine. If you join the Airship Heritage Trust, which is a charity preserving all the historical knowledge, and I edit the magazine, and there is a website which is airshipsonline.com, and there's a tremendous amount of stuff there. Anyone who's interested in developing airships, I recommend you go and look at the patent libraries. There's a tremendous amount of ideas that have just been forgotten, and some of them were not technically possible at the time they were put there, and we now have materials and all sorts of stuff that makes them possible.
Giles, thank you very much indeed for that. I would like to mention to you that our website, the Airship Association website, which is what we're going to charge Giles an extra fee for promoting his, is www.airship-association.org. There are some challenges with the website that we're overcoming at the moment, but it is going to shortly be a refreshed, renewed, redesigned haven for all sorts of information about everything that the association does, that the airship community has done in the past, and I commend it to you as a place to go to learn about us, airships, and the future of airships. So I'd like to finish by thanking Alan Shrimpton for monitoring the messages, for putting them up. And I just see that Peter Fryer has said, would that be an airship B&B? I think that's brilliant. I'm sure you're talking about the hotel idea that I mentioned. Yeah, that's a good idea. We could patent that, airship B&B. Excellent. But Alan Shrimpton, thank you very much for monitoring the messaging. Dean Arnett in particular, thank you for putting this all together, bringing us up when we are talking and keeping us down when we shouldn't be talking, and doing all of the work to make this happen. Thank you all for watching and for participating, and thank you to the panel. I hope to see you all on the 8th of August for the next one. In the meantime, enjoy the rest of your weekend, and see you all very soon at an Airship Association event. Bye-bye.